Hey guys, we're gonna do a short training video here today, just covering how to set up Crestron gear. Let's say in this scenario, you've just finished installing the system according to CAD. Everything's wired and ready to go. So we need to make the load code to the touch panel, load code to the processor, make everything communicate, and that's what this video is going to cover here today. So a couple concepts we need to uh, understand. First is networking. Most of the time, in a modern day scenario, when we've got a 3 series processor, we've got a smart graphics touch panel, most of our equipment is going to communicate over Ethernet. There was a time, and you still will see it on jobs today, that you have stuff communicating, even Crestron devices on CrestNet, which is it's a bus, a 4-wire bus that carries 24-volt power, and I think it's a baud rate of like 38400 or something like that. But data communication to all the connected devices, and then each device has an ID on that CrestNet bus. So what we're really going to focus on here is networking. So a couple concepts to understand are DHCP versus static IP addressing. So if I open up my Ethernet settings for my computer here, I'm going to show you where that is. So right now I've got a network switch that I have a Crestron CP3 processor connected to, as well as a touch panel. And you can see those over here in device discovery. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if I go to change adapter options, and then here's my Ethernet network port. So we've got Bluetooth, Ethernet, Ethernet 5, and Wi-Fi. So I'm going to connect all the gear over my Ethernet jack on my laptop. Right click on that, go to Properties, and you'll see Internet Protocol version 4. Click on that, Properties. Now this is where you set the communication settings for your laptop to communicate to the gear on the LAN port. So I've got two options here: obtain IP address automatically, or use the following IP address. So if you have a system that you're setting up that has, like, say it's an existing network that when you plug your laptop into, you're pulling an IP address, then all the gear should be able to plug into that, pull an IP address. That's going to be not every time. So there's going to be many times when you're out there in the field where you're going to need to set the address of each individual device. And there's the important things when you're setting IP addresses is that these first 3 numbers need to match for every device. So if you look at my CP3 over here and my touch panel, and let's see if we can move this around really quick so you can see it at the same time. Okay, they have a 192.168.10.2, 10.3, and I'm at 10.87. And the only thing that's important is that this subnet mask matches for all devices that you want to communicate, and that's normally going to be a 255.255.255.0. You don't really have to worry about a gateway when we're setting up a local network. Say you've got your biamp processor, or your sound structure, your Polycom, and then you've got your Crestron gear, and it's all plugging into a small Netgear switch in the rack, just for communication control between the devices. Then you don't need to worry about a gateway. So we're just worried that we're just trying to make all the devices communicate to each other. So that's going to happen with this setting the first 3. They're called octets, and then the last one has to be unique for the device. So normally what we do at SKC is we set our master processor to 120, our master video switch, like a DM switcher, would be at 150, and touch panels, vary from like 30 to 45 in that range there. Okay, so I'm at a compatible address. Now, there's a couple ways to set IP addresses. Let's say, well, let's talk about device discovery here really quick. So, Toolbox is going to be the software that you use to configure, communicate, even test and verify Crestron programming and Crestron gear. So what we're doing right now is I've got, hold on a second. Okay, we're going to talk about Toolbox for a moment here. So Toolbox is the software that we're going to use to configure, load code, even test and verify communication is working properly for all Crestron gear. And Toolbox is just kind of how the name suggests. It's got it's a software that's built with many different tools, tool type softwares, built into it for different purposes. So the main ones that we would use in setting up a simple Crestron system is number one, device discovery. So once you have set IP addresses on the gear, and I just showed you how to do that on your laptop, but we would also need to do it on the touch panel and the processor in this system. Touch panels, when they first get powered up, if they don't have a code loaded to them, they're automatically going to go to a setup menu where you can go in and set the Ethernet settings for the device. Like here's this is pretty much the touch panel that I have here locally in the room. Any of the TSW panels have the same layout with the hard buttons over here on the right. And let's say you're working on a system that has an existing file running on the touch panel, and they put a static address in there, and you need to get it back to something else because you can't see it in Toolbox and you can't communicate to it. So here's the quick way to do that. If you hit these top 4 buttons in sequence twice, and it's kind of a little tricky, you just keep trying it if it doesn't pop up, but then it'll reboot and take you into the setup menu. Well, where you have many options for audio for the touch panel, diagnostics, but mainly you're going to go to the Ethernet settings so that you can set it to be compatible with the rest of the Crestron gear. Here's a CP3. This is like almost identical to the one I've got right here with me. And this, if you don't have an IP address on it and you don't have a DHCP server, which means something that can hand out IP addresses to all the gear that's connected to it. And this is a plug for what I'm going to plug right now is it's the one of the best tools you can bring with you on a job site is your own network switch, and that has just pick up a Netgear switch at Radio Shack or whatever, but like Best Buy or anywhere, Walmart even. A place that you can get a network switch that will do DHCP server. So it'll actually give everything an IP address on the network, and then it also keeps it from having conflicts. But that's a great way to set things up quick. Like you could plug your Biamp to Sierra into it on the LAN port. You can plug your touch panel into it through a PoE injector. You'll need PoE injection for these TSW touch panels. Plug your processor into it. One side note is a lot of the newer processors anyone that has an N on the end of the name, like a CP3N or a Pro 3, it has two LAN ports on the back. So you've got one called LAN, the other's called Control Subnet. Now, if you have a Control Subnet port, you can actually use that as a DHCP router for a network that doesn't have, like, say you got a little Netgear 4-port, 8-port switch that's a basic switch. It does not give out IP addresses. You can use that Control Subnet port, plug into the switch, then all the other gear will actually get its IP address from the Crestron processor. So it's kind of a handy, quick way to set things up. We're not really going to go deep into that here in this tutorial. So so I can hit these buttons to get into the setup menu and actually set the IP address of the touch panel manually. I can plug in a USB cable into the front of this control processor, or even if it's a little RMC3 or something like that, plug in a USB cable and you'll be able to use Toolbox to set that IP address. And we just talked about or we're going to talk about a couple softwares here that run inside Toolbox. The first one being is System Info. It looks like a little I here, or you can access it under Tools, System Info. Then how you use this is an interface window to gather and manipulate information or settings on a Crestron device. So what I'm going to do is, first thing you want to do is you hit this little pencil down here, brings a pop-up window, and it's asking you how you want to connect to the device. So if you've just plugged in a USB cable to a processor, you can hit USB. Don't worry about setting the model or anything. It's going to automatically recognize the Crestron device that's connected USB. Now, here's a caveat. Don't plug more than one Crestron device into your computer USB at one time, because then this is not going to work. So one at a time, a USB, if you need to configure it and set the IP address. What I'm going to do, just so you guys can see how this system info works, is I'm going to go TCP, and then I'm going to select this address over here. There's two ways I can do this. Normally, if I know the address, because let's say I just set it on the touch panel, right? I went to the front panel, or the setup menu on the touch panel, and I set this, set the address, and then I can connect, and it's going to show you in this bottom right corner, how you're connecting to the device. And just give it a minute. All right, so I've got a TSW 752 connected right here. I've got the and then inside the system info is a bunch of sub windows. Each sub window has a refresh button and a play button. The play button is what you use to access those settings and change them if you need to. So if I were going to change the Ethernet settings, I could hit this. I could turn DHCP off, and then I could set this to whatever I need to. Maybe it's not 192.168.10. Maybe it's .45 that we're going to use. Then I can also change the host name. Host name is a really great tool to use with any gear, but with Crestron especially, I think you should really make host name one of the first things that you edit, especially if you're in we're doing a big project that has 20 different rooms, and it's all on the client's network, and so you can plug into the network and you can see all these touch panels, all these processors, all these switches, and a good way to organize this stuff is when you're first setting it up, give it a name that's applicable in this host name field. So TSW 752, and I'm going to say home TP, right? And I'm going to click apply. It's going to reboot that touch panel. It's going to set that, anytime you do an Ethernet setting on a device, it's going to reboot it to initialize those new settings that you put down. And the host name is really a great thing to do, because let's say we're just plugging into some gear, maybe even at the shop, because you want to set it all up, load code to it so it's ready to go to the field and plug in. When you get to the field, you're plugging into a new network, and so the IP addresses are going to be different. Well, if you set all of your connections over hostname, they're automatically going to see each other on the network. They're going to know what device they're supposed to connect to. Make the connection. It's going to start working. It's going to, it's just a quicker, more robust way to do it, because you have, if IP addresses change, especially if it's not a static scenario, you're using DHCP. This is a great way to go. So we got that. That's taking a while here. Now I'm going to do the same thing. And one thing, when you are changing Ethernet settings, sometimes your gear's gonna, the windows are gonna lock up, because it's gonna be looking for that device and you've just changed it. And so after it does a reboot, it's gonna say, well, this device isn't here anymore, because it doesn't see on the same Ethernet or whatever. So I'm going to do device discovery is the second window that we want to talk about here. So the second tool, it looks like binoculars up here, or tools, device discovery. This is going to be probably the quickest, easiest way to work with a system. It's going to, every Crestron device on the network will populate on left, and then if you double click on those devices, then you'll be able to work with the parameters and settings for that device over in the fields on the right. So now we're seeing our TSW 752 home TP. I'm going to double click on the CP3N. I'm actually going to set the Ethernet settings of this. I'm going to change this home. So I'm going to change the host name of this to home CP3, and then I'm going to apply. Another thing to be aware of, there's going to be, on a normal system, you have gear that isn't Crestron, like say this Biamp Tessera. Tesseras are pretty, are pretty easy to figure out the IP address that it has. And if you don't give it an IP address and it's connected to a network that doesn't have a DHCP server, then you can hit the select button, the up down buttons, and you'll see on this little digital readout on the front of the Tessera what host name and IP address that Tessera has currently, which is really handy, because I mean, back in the days when it was all AudioFlex and Nexia, you have to plug an RS-232 cable into the back of it if it was and set it all via telnet, pull the settings, transfer new settings via telnet. and it's just a time-consuming process where, you know, you can plug into this. You'll see that, and if it's connected to a network that doesn't have a DHCP router, you're going to have a 169 address. You can use that to your advantage. I do it all the time. It's what I do is like set your IP address to a 169 address, something that's compatible with what you're seeing on the front of that Tessera. You'll be able to connect to it with the Tessera software, assign a new IP address, and you're up and running. So that's just a handy thing to do here. I'm gonna get this, close this out, relaunch it. All right, now we've got two devices, processor, touch panel. They both have a host name that makes sense. And now we're in, we've got network communication working to both of these devices. Last window I want to talk about in Toolbox before we actually load code to this gear is TextConsole, and it looks like a little command prompt window up here. It's really similar to command prompt. If you hit your Windows icon in the bottom left and you type CMD, enter, this is command prompt. And actually, so you know, really quick, a couple of nice commands you can use in this window is ipconfig /all. If you do that, it's going to give you your Ethernet settings for, you know, every Ethernet connection that you have. So we're looking at, here's my host name, and then Ethernet 5 is disconnected. Wireless LAN is oh, that's not the one. Okay, here we go. Here's my Ethernet adapter. This is what we were setting in that when we first started here, 192.168.10.87 with that subnet, and you'll see there's no default gateway. DHCP enabled, no. Then my wireless adapter, blah 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 blah. But here's another one. Now let's say we're looking for gear on the network, right? And we can't seem to find it. It's a DHCP network, and we don't know what the IP address is. Here's a really handy command: ARP-A. That's going to show. All right, now it's looking at. This is my Wi-Fi interface, my 10.0.0.1. Here's my 192.168.10. You'll see there's a .1, which .1 is usually going to be whatever's handing out the IP addresses, and that is true. That's my Netgear switch that I'm connected to. So if I open up a browser and I did there's my Netgear switch that I'm connected, that I have everything connected to right now. .2 is our processor. .3 is our touch panel. So those are a couple quick commands to use in command prompt to learn a little bit about the network that you're connected to and try to figure out where the gear's at. Okay, now TextConsole. TextConsole is a real basic but powerful tool to use with Crestron gear, and it's like what we just looked at, command prompt, and we can connect to any Crestron device using TextConsole for a myriad of different commands that we want to use. Let me show you a new way of grabbing this IP address. I can right click on this and I can say copy host name or copy IP address, I'm going to copy the host name. Now I'm going to go to this new TextConsole window. I'm going to hit the pencil, and I'm going to Control V, paste that host name, and let's see if we can connect. There we go, CP3N. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. You can do a reboot, you can do initialize, you can wipe the program, you can set the IP address, you can set the IP IDs, you can verify, anything you can do pretty much in any of these other windows, you can do through TextConsole. But if you want to play with it, here's a good thing to do. Just type a question mark, and then you're going to see all the commands. I mean, there are some other commands that, they don't really print out here, but you're going to see all the commands that you can use for this device, so that it's device specific. So we've got reboot down here. We've got this is where's the firmware one? Version, I think it's called version. There we go. So version, and you see the letters in capital letters. That means that you can just type those three. So if I want VER, enter, it's going to show me the firmware version that's running on the CP3N. So it looks like they did get rid of some, but I'm showing the IP table with IPT. Is that even in here anymore? No, they're not listing it. But is there maybe? There we go. So if you type help all, you get the full list of commands here, and that should have that IPT command that I just issued. IP address, IP config, so IP table. So that command just shows you what's in the IP table on the processor. Okay, so that's enough for TextConsole right now. But that's what we're gonna go to next here. First, let's load code to our processor. Double click on it in the left. Program, make sure I'm on program slot 1. There are going to be scenarios where you need to load multiple programs to a processor. Always verify when you're working with it that you're on the right program slot. Program slot 1 is what you want to, 90% of the time you're going to be using, but on a 3 series processors, older 2 series processors only had a single program slot. So what we want to do is we're going to load a code to program slot 1, and let's see what I got. Just going to go to let's go to this one I'm working on. It asked me a couple questions there. It asked me if I wanted to overwrite the IP table. If you're loading a new program, yes, you want to overwrite the IP table. If you get a rev of code, like a new rev, then you probably want to overwrite the IP table, but verify that with your programmer. Because sometimes you have to put in, you don't know the IP address of the gear. Let's say it's, some like a video processing window or something, and somebody has put that IP address in manually after the code is loaded to the processor. Then you don't want to overwrite that, or give that information to your programmer so that he can then put it in, so hard code it into the program. So now I got a program running. IP table is how Crestron gear communicate on a network most of the time. There's a few exceptions, but what happens when you write a code, and I'll pull a code up here. So this is the control software for writing Crestron control code. And like right here, I've got a DMPS up here. I've got all my logic down here. That's what the actual code that is written for the program that you done. But if you look on the DMPS up here, you look on the Ethernet devices. This has got one Ethernet device. It's a touch panel, and you see IPID 4. I mean, there's other times, especially if you get like a large matrixing switch where you have tons of Ethernet devices here. Like this one that I have running on here has got 17. But so what? This is my IPID. So when I build the code in Crestron, I don't know what that IP address. I don't even know what the network is going to be like for that this equipment once it's in the field and it's put together. All I know is I need an Ethernet connection to this TSW 1050. So then I assign it an IPID, and you actually click on it, hit F6, and that pulls up your window where you're gonna you can set the IPID. So now I've got an IPID for this touch panel at 4, and then I'm waiting for, or the processor in the program is waiting for something to connect on that ID. Like, see, we've got a TSW 1050 on ID 03, and if you look at this IP table window, you'll see all the different devices here. We got a 16 by 16. I always put mine on 40, and then I start there. So everything below 40 in the 40s is the gear connected to the DM switcher. I've got a plain RVCS on 10, and I have an IP address assigned to that. See all these 12700s? That means the processor doesn't know what the IP address is. It's going to wait for that device, and it's a Crestron device, to connect and say, hey, I'm IPID 3. So let's do that right now. We got a program on the processor. Nothing on the touch panel yet. Let's go to that same job folder and load a touch panel file to this guy. I think what we're running up here, see how this is taking really long? The firmware is probably old. Well, sometimes if the firmware is older on the device, then it doesn't really work that well with device discovery. And one key thing to do is always keep your Crestron software up to date. You don't have to update firmware unless you're running into a problem, because sometimes running brand new firmware can hurt you more than help you. But if you do run into an issue, that's probably the first thing Crestron's going to tell you to do is update firmware and everything. And it can be a good practice, but it really depends on what's going on with firmware. But if your firmware is running older on your device, you can have some issues, especially in device discovery where it doesn't connect. Then usually what I do is right-click on this, copy the IP address, open System Info, and System Info will work usually every time, even when device discovery is having issues. And you can switch it from host name to IP address, and sometimes that'll help too. So I'm going to go Display Project. I'm going to browse. I'm going to go to that same folder, and I'm going to go to, I'm going to load this touch panel file. It's not for the correct touch panel, but it should size properly, which is kind of the nice thing about the newer smart graphics touch panels, is that they can resize the file to fit properly. Works not all the time perfectly. Usually I just edit the touch panel file to be appropriate for the the actual resolution of the touch panel. So this file's loading. And while we're doing this, let me go to that folder. And I'm going to open up this X panel. And this is kind of what my touch panel would look like right now, because I don't have an IP ID in it. So it doesn't know how to connect to the processor yet. It doesn't know where the processor is at. So what we need to do is we need to tell the touch panel where the processor is at. And we're going to do that right here. Modify IP table. We click on this, and let's just modify that. If there was nothing here, we could hit add entry and create what we're going to edit right now. So IP ID was 3, if you remember when we were looking at the processor that we needed for the TSW touch panel. Leave the device ID alone, and then IP address or host name. So I could put either this IP address, or I could put the host name that I copied earlier, and then leave this at master, because that is the master we're talking to. So we're telling the touch panel this is where the master processor is on the network, and this is what the master. This is your ID to communicate to the master. So when this connects, the master is going to say, I know what IP ID 3 is. That's my touch panel. So I should be seeing this communication back and forth to that touch panel. That goes back to our control code that we're looking at. So all these commands, serial, analog, digital commands, go into our touch panel defined in code is on IP. Oh, this is 4, but this is not the code that we have run here. So for this Aspirus code, it's 3. Click OK, and then we're gonna send to device. And so essentially what I'm going to do is the same thing right here. I'm going to go to host settings, 03, and I'm going to use the IP address of this processor. And so then this is now the touch panel is communicating to the processor. And it's going to work because, as long as the code is good and the touch panel file is good, then now we have communication to the processor. And that is how you get a system started, up and running, configured, and communicating on a network. Crestron gear, kind of basic. Let's plug this stuff in, load code to it, set the IP table entries, the IP IDs, and get it working. So hopefully this is a helpful tool for you guys, and hopefully we'll making some more of these videos to give you guys some resources for learning and getting better at this stuff. And appreciate listening, and have a good one. Thanks.